We'll kick off. So welcome to everyone who's joined us for the second session in our week-long event, which is Turn Up the Wow. It's awesome to have you with us today, and we hope that this is the first or maybe second, if you joined us for the keynote a little earlier, of the presentations that you'll be joining this week. This session in particular is going to be a panel discussion. You can see some of our awesome speakers on the screen there with their videos, but this is going to be a panel discussion where we're talking all about translating your story into a storyboard. So how do you kind of craft the right story for your message and then start to translate that across into your video. And this is going to be an hour-long session. We're going to get into some real nice meat of the topic and really explore it from a few different angles with our different guest speakers. So if you do have any questions, there will be time for Q&A at the end, so you can pop them in the question box which you've got on your GoToWebinar screen. So you can put those in there at any point and we will come and answer them at the end. This is also being recorded, so if you have to drop off for any reason, you can watch the recording afterwards and we'll send that round on email later today. But before we get into the questions, let's just do a quick intro to our speakers. So the first is Louis, who heads up our Sparkle creative team, making bespoke videos for organizations all around the world. We also have Oliver, who is really focused on our training and e-learning content, as well as actually supporting Louis and the guys with bespoke videos. So he's got a number of perspectives to sort of talk about storyboarding and storytelling. And then we've also got Johnny, who is our head of customer success, and Johnny's been with Sparkle for an awfully long time, so he has loads of experience working with VideoScribe as well as our other products and services to help bring your story to life. So I think together we've just got a really good range of perspectives, but I'll let them just quickly say hi before we get into the questions.
Hello.
Yeah, hi there.
Yeah. Hiya. Yeah, I think
Cool.
Naomi summed it up pretty well.
Perfect. I've done the job too well. That's what we always want to hear. But a good opportunity for a little extra mic test. Okay, so let's get into the first question, which is, I think there is a tendency to think of storytelling as quite a sort of maybe airy-fairy topic that you might not know how you can apply that directly to your organization or your business. So I think to kick off, it would just be great to hear from the three of you an example of where you've used storytelling to help an organization achieve their goals. So maybe if we start with Oliver, if you could kind of talk us through an example.
Yeah, sure. So one of my jobs at Sparkle is to contribute to the templates we have available via VideoScribe. And one of the most popular ones that I've come up with is the whiteboard explainer collage that you might have seen. So with that, our goal was to provide our user base with the foundations of all the best whiteboard explainer videos so that they need only tweak it to fit their needs and tell their story effectively. So I started on it by watching back some of the best whiteboard explainers I'd seen on the internet and working out what made them so great. So generally, the best of them visually follow a narrative structure that is clear to the viewer. Even when everything's been drawn out, you can look at it and you see a story running through the whole thing. So I split the template into a sort of beginning, a middle, and an end as a structure to follow. And generally, the best videos also inform the audience by using clear, bold images and only very few instances of text. So I included some examples of some of our best metaphor images and a few temporary statistics to give the impression of a story being told. So by following the guidance in the template, users can then tweak this and the content to tell their own story. And hopefully the popularity kind of speaks for itself.
Definitely. I mean, if you haven't already seen that template, it is available in VideoScribe, so you can check it out. But yeah, it's, as you said, Ollie, it's just helping people tell their own story in a structure that is sort of tried and tested to work. So thank you for that. If we go to Louis, can you kind of talk us through your example?
Yeah, so I think my favorite example of this was a job that we did, I think last year. It was for an insurance company, which isn't always the most interesting subject matter, but what they had done is we basically told a story of insurance through an incident where avocados were pirated off the coast of South America and increased the costs of other avocados in South America. And it's just taken a subject that I probably would have forgotten by now, but has sort of stuck with me because it was an interesting way of making it real rather than just the concept of, oh, this is how we do it. It's actually a real life example of a story that has happened and is quite interesting.
Definitely. I mean, I've also seen that video and I know it does just stick in your mind because it is so unique, and that's really where we're kind of touching on the real value of storytelling beyond just sort of a concept. It has sort of real implications. And what about you, Johnny? How have you kind of used storytelling to support organization?
So in my case, I'm not maybe quite as creative as these guys. So you have a different perspective here. So a lot of the videos I do, my background's training. So I do a lot of training videos or educational type videos. So videos where you're trying to basically explain something. So here, it's really important to plan out the structure. You want to make sure you're explaining it well and not confusing people. So presenting things in a logical order is probably one of the most important things there. And there's lots of different techniques you can use and things, but one that I use regularly is basically repetition. So making sure that key points are covered more than once, and so people have a chance to absorb the information, especially if it's sort of an important, maybe tricky thing to understand. So I'm always thinking about ways in which I can get away with basically repeating things. So for example, what you might want to do is when you want to talk about a particular subject, is to provide an overview of that subject first. So talk about it in more basic terms, give us sort of an overall picture of the whole thing, and then you can go into each of the different areas and give more detail. And the advantage of that is that, yeah, you're repeating it, helping people to understand it, but also they have a framework to fit it all into, so they know sort of how it fits in with the rest of things. So yeah, that's an example I use quite a lot.
Nice. And I think we're starting to kind of touch on it in different areas, but I know, Ollie, you've kind of got some thoughts about why stories are so effective, if you can talk us through those.
Yeah, I think historically stories have kind of been a way for creators to stimulate their audience through the imagination, through emotion. If you think of all the best movies you've ever seen, usually it's because they tell a story that you can relate to somehow, or involve characters that you relate to, and they become more memorable to you because of this. So when faced with a relatable scenario or a character, like the best stories tend to involve, I think audiences engage on a deeper level than with just a simple explanation, sort of enjoying the points they connect with and contemplating the issues and questions that are raised on a slightly deeper level. I think they sort of contextualize it within their own experiences, and in doing so, think about it with more depth. And I think stories are inspiring to audiences because they not only illustrate how to solve problems in a narrative sense, but they also demonstrate where an audience member can go with your guidance and what they are capable of. I think they sort of empower audiences almost.
Yeah, I think those are some like incredible emotions to be able to stimulate and give people that feeling. If you're talking about your brand and you're associating with those kind of messages, it's going to do wonders for your kind of reputation, your image in customers' eyes. But the same with kids and inspiring them in the classroom with learning materials. I think it applies to so many different cases. And I guess following on from that, because you kind of sort of touched on characters and a few other bits, what do you think are the key elements of a great story?
I think it's a character that is very generally relatable. You know, the character is sort of what you're framing the story around. If you're creating a journey through a story, usually it involves a character taking that journey. So it's making that as relatable as possible, you know, trying to keep things in very general terms so that the broadest possible audience that you want to capture is engaged by that story.
Definitely. Do you guys have anything to add onto those? So I know it's kind of a broader question.
I think it'd be worth remembering that stories don't have to just be The Princess Bride and Star Wars. They don't have to be big epics. A lot of adverts and a lot of the content that we consume in our daily lives are stories, like a can of Coca-Cola rolling down a hill and a man spraying himself with it, or a lady having a Hoover break or something like that. There is always a story and stuff that we're watching. It's not just the long feature films.
Cool. Yeah. And again, from my point of view, sort of thinking more about those explainer video type ones. Like I said before, the sort of having a good flow and presenting things in a logical order is really important. But I think for those type of videos, one of the key elements is using signposting. So having lots of signposting throughout the video so that people know where they are and sort of what you've covered and what you're going to cover and so on. So for example, you might want to start off with an introduction to the whole video, explaining sort of what topics you're going to cover and all that sort of stuff. And that provides like a roadmap to the video. And then as you're going through each of the sections, you can be constantly referring back to that roadmap and indicating where you are. And again, it just helps people to sort of keep track and piece things together. You can either do that visually. So you might, for example, move to a new scene. You might put headings and things like that up to reference back to the roadmap. Or you can do it with your voiceover. So you can be saying things like, rather than just going through the whole thing and it all joining together and people being a bit, oh, where are we now? I'm not sure. If they've got that kind of roadmap at the beginning, ideally visually, some kind of idea about sort of all the sections you're going to cover, and then you're saying where you are as you go through. As you say in the voiceover, you say, okay, we've covered that section now we're going to go on to this one. It just helps to break it up and help people to piece together that puzzle.
I know, touching on that, Johnny, that it also helps with video engagements, keeping people watching for longer, because like you said, not only do they understand it more, but you're sort of breadcrumbing the value throughout and kind of keeping them intrigued as to what's next and what you're going to cover. So I know particularly for like YouTube videos, that can be really helpful to improve your duration of watching. So definitely all great points. So leading on from that, once you have got your idea for your story, you know what you want to say, how do you start translating that into a video? Maybe if we go to you, Louis.
So we start with the script generally. We'd start with our key elements, and as Johnny and Oliver have said, characters, ups and downs, signposts, because those ups and downs are the story. And then we start getting these into a good structured order, so it's not just random. And we'd use that as the basis of writing our script. As we've covered, there's several structures that we could use for that. Your longer ones are the 3-act film structure. If you're doing it for adverts, you do it a bit better. The best way I've been taught for that is emotion, facts, actions. Emotion being the connection that you have with them or the audience's problem. The facts are going to be what you're selling, the solution that you're selling, the solution you're providing, and then the action, which is basically what you want them to do after watching your video. Go to my website, bring our phone number, stop smoking, book a holiday, something like that. And yeah, that's going to be the first step if we're going to create a script, is use the plan that we're just about to lay out.
Nice. I think that's a really nice structure that basically anyone could follow as well, because it doesn't just have to be a business setting. Like you said, it could be educational and you want them to find out more at the end or go away and do some independent learning or activities. So that's an ideal structure. So why is the script so important? Obviously, you kind of touched on it a bit, Louis, but to really get into the depth of it, Johnny, do you have any kind of thoughts on this?
So videos are obviously very visual, and that's what makes them really captivating and also really memorable. But behind all of that is the script, and I think all great videos, they're like a combination of a good script combined with great visuals, which kind of bring out the points and support the story. So really, the backbone of your video is the script. It's what carries the sort of narrative and the story, And if you think about it, it's the voiceover. It's actually going to convey most of the content within a video, even though we remember the visuals so much. Yeah, so it's really important to start off with a good script and make sure you're happy with it. So that's sort of really sort of stage one, is ironing that out, what you want to say, how you want to say it, the order, all those sorts of things. Because then you're going to take that and use that to build the rest of the video. So you read that, or possibly even record it and listen to it. And that's what gives you ideas for how to bring those words to life, how to illustrate them, that sort of stuff, and how to support that voiceover with the rest of the video. And the other thing actually is the timing. So all the timings are going to be dictated pretty much by the voiceover. So not only the length of the entire video, but each scene, each section, and even down to individual animations. So how long an animation needs to take in order to match up with the voiceover and keep in sync. So yeah, I think nailing the script, early on is really important.
Yeah, it's a very good point. If you only have 30 seconds to get your message out there, but you found you've written 4 minutes worth of content, you're going to have to change something.
Definitely, I think it is literally that the more compact and concise your message is, the almost more important it is that your script is just super sharp and is free of any extra waffle or anything, because you're just diluting it.
I would like to add to that, though, that the script doesn't necessarily have to be a voiceover. You can do quite a lot with on-screen text if you're doing perhaps international videos or wanted something a bit quicker or something for Instagram. But that's still, everything else that applies, you still have to do everything else we talked about.
Yeah, that's a great point, because not every video is going to have a voiceover, but yeah, the same sort of structure and planning applies. So I guess sticking with you, Louis, once you've kind of got that script, say we're working with like a client script that's come through, how do you start working that into your storyboard? What would you kind of look to do first?
So for the script, we start with, it's almost like a storyboard. I guess it's more of like an ideas board. So if you think of it as a storyboard, but using text instead of images, so we've got our script and then another area that has all of our directions in it. So we're going to write out each frame, what we want to include, what happens, any notes that we can think of, any idle states, just what's happening there, and getting all of our ideas down. From there, we'll refine it until all of the stakeholders, like the clients or the artists or anyone involved, is happy with it. And then we'll move on to an actual drawn storyboard, focusing on what we've put inside our idea board. In some cases, we do a sketched storyboard, so on paper, take photos of it, upload it, which will help us work out compositions and content and where stuff goes. Especially if we're working in certain mediums, like if we were doing something with live action, we can't get those images until we've shot it. We can't shoot it until we've got our storyboard. So we'd use sketches for something like that, or 3D generated stuff. Everything just takes quite a long time to do. So we won't want to waste time with compositions that we may not stick with. However, if we were doing 2D or whiteboard sort of stuff, generally we'll just go straight ahead and draw out those illustrations as they would be final.
And I guess we're kind of also touching on why a storyboard is so important, because it's not just if you're working with a client like you are, where you need to kind of get that feedback, but it's also even for yourself, just having that plan and knowing what you're going to start ticking off. I know, Oliver.
I'm doing a video totally on my own. It still has a storyboard and it still has all of these stages. It's not just for show. It's I'd say the most important part of any of the production.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Ollie, did you have any other points to add about starting work? I know you come at videos from a slightly different angle, sometimes for clients, sometimes for internal. So do you have any extra things that you're kind of thinking about when you're starting to visualize the scripts?
I think it's a very gradual process. I think it's important not to put too much pressure on yourself to, come up in one instant with all of the visuals for your video. I think, during your scripting, think about what you're writing down. You know, if you can start to brainstorm some stuff whilst you're writing that. You know, when, like we say, when in the sort of in-between step when you're doing your text storyboard, think about, you know, don't hold yourself back at all either. You know, sort of feel free to brainstorm as much as you can, whether it's possible or not later on. You know, you don't need to worry about that just yet. Just get up with put down as many ideas as you can at the early stages, you know, whenever you might think of them, so that you've got as much to work with later.
So this is really like the time to just get the creativity out and get the ideas flowing, rather than trying to be like perfect first time, which I feel like we all have a tendency to fall into that trap every now and again, where we're like, it must be 100% right first time. It's just nice to have that reassurance that it's all good, we can refine it later. And we kind of have started getting into the realm of how you start breaking the story down into the storyboard, but I just wondered if there's any more detail you can add, because I know, Louis, you started mentioning like different scenes and scene structures and layouts and things. So what are the kind of key elements that you'd start doing to break it down?
I think, so first of all, going back to what Oliver said, is that throughout all of this, I'm always doodling. I've always got a piece of paper or a notepad that I'm just thrashing out ideas on, sketches or shapes that don't mean anything to anyone else, but I know what they mean, just to get these ideas out of my head and into the real world. And it's going to make it a lot easier to draw from and come back to when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of the full storyboards. But for the first stage of this, I think I generally start by looking for inspiration. There's nothing that we go into, or nothing that I go into at least, just blind. I'll always have something in mind of what it'll be, and I use resources like dribble.com, Behance, Vimeo, stuff like that, to look at how people have done it before, how people have done it that I like, importantly, how people have done it that I really don't like, and finding something that will work for this. Because by this point, we've been chatting with clients, we've been chatting with whoever it is, so we know what we're trying to say, we know how we're trying to say it. So finding the best way to present that, we're actually going to know quite a bit by then. Yeah, we've got a start in mind for them, and so this is sort of the stage where we start turning some of those sketches into something more real and something that means something to another person and not just yourself.
Definitely. Ollie, Johnny, do you have any kind of extra bits to add on that? I know, Johnny, you're obviously coming at it from a slightly different perspective, because in your Udemy courses, you actually teach people kind of the foundations of how to get started with storyboarding. And obviously, Louis is absolutely a pro, but for people getting started, are there any sort of extra things they should consider?
I like the thing that Ollie says, that it is something that evolves. And so, yeah, you don't have to sort of know it all at one go. It's going to come to you over time. So that's one thing. But in terms of, yeah, the turning into a storyboard, yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can do that. But one of the things I like to think about earlier is the layout. What layout do I want the video to have? So is it going to be kind of very simple, where images are drawn and move off to the right and then more up here and so on, and we're just tracking along in a linear way? Or are we going to be going from scene to scene, so you sort of drawing a scene and spending some time there before moving on to another scene? Or the other really popular one is like a collage type thing, so you're actually building an overall picture. And I like this one because from my training background, that's what I used to do a lot, is write on the whiteboard, and throughout a course I'd always be adding to the whiteboard and pointing to it and adding little bits in. So basically you're creating that in a video, you're building it up slowly, and then at the end you zoom out to see a complete picture of how it all fits together, which is a really nice way. So depending on which of those you're doing, the way you create a storyboard is going to be very different. So for the scene by scene one, that's the classic one, and that's where you'd be talking about your frames, and frame by frame you'd be talking about what you want to appear in that frame, and then how the camera moves to the next frame and all those sorts of things. But if it's a collage, you kind of just want to start with a big bit of paper and draw the whole thing out and make sure it all fits together and looks nice, and then you can imagine how the camera's going to track around that as you progress.
That's a great point, and we do actually have a blog on that we could share in the follow-up email if anyone is interested in learning a bit more about that, because I appreciate there's a lot of different options like you said, and knowing which style to pick for your video is super important. So before we jump into the next question, is there anything else you want to flag to kind of be thinking about now, or are those kind of the main bits that you would be like checking off mentally?
I think I would emphasize the text storyboard idea, because I always find that completely crucial. I think it's very rare that I read or write a script and instantly have an idea of how the whole video is going to look, or instantly come up with visual ideas. I find it much easier. I just do it on Word. I just create a table with 2 columns. Down one column, I sort of have the sentences or the points of the script all split into different cells. And then for each sentence, I think, okay, completely abstractly, what would I want to see alongside this sentence? It doesn't have to be anything too specific. I'm just writing a very vague description of what I want to see. And this is, this has sort of saved me a couple of times, because I know that I can't remember what project it was that I was working a little while ago, but there was one sentence where I was trying to come up with an idea for it, and I was going through all these inspirational images, and I was thinking, which of these is going to work? None of these are going to work. And then I just stopped myself and said, okay, just in the vaguest possible sense, in the most sort of abstract way, what do you want to be on screen during this? And I just wrote a very vague idea. And then when I moved on to visual storyboarding, suddenly that clicked, and suddenly I knew exactly how that would translate into a visual. So try to get, that's like the best way, I think, to get your thought processes down that you can then translate into visuals.
That's a really good tip. Oh, sorry, go on, Louis.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a very important and very good point, is that we've never turned up to a video and just sat down and drawn the finished product, and that's been it. It's been finished. It's always been a process to get there, even if it's just going through iterations of illustrations and iterations of concepts of what we're going to draw. It's never that easy, unfortunately. Like you just follow the steps and get there.
I feel like it's almost the same as sort of working on anything creative, though, is your ideas often just sort of iterate and change the more you look at it. Like even if you're writing an email or designing a web page, or you're creating some resources for a lesson, but by the time you've gone through it a couple of times, which is basically what a storyboard gives you the ability to do, is that like reflection time, isn't it? You then see things a bit differently.
It's important not to sort of lose heart at the beginning and think, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do, because it does come together as you work on it, and it is a process, and it can be a bit painful sometimes, but it's also really satisfying when suddenly you go, oh, okay, that makes sense now. Like that sentence you were stuck on, Oliver. What I might find is, much later on, I'll have some other ideas. I was like, oh yeah, and that links with that, and there'll be some kind of pattern. And oh, okay, that kind of fits together. And then you kind of know where you're going. It's a bit like I've heard people talk about writing books, and it's the same sort of thing. You kind of get a bit stuck, and then it all kind of comes together as you kind of go through the process.
Yeah, and I think as you were talking about with Zoe this morning, the whole blank page syndrome, I'm not sure the actual word for it, but having nothing there is very hard to find out what to do. So if you're thinking of something that might be a bit cliche, a bit of a trope, but you can't think of anything else, it's often good to just get it in there, because you can build upon what you already have a lot easier than starting something from scratch. So even if you put it in there without the intention of it being made into the final video, having it there will end up giving you new ideas and more to expand on.
Definitely. I feel like it's almost the classic of, as soon as you've probably walked away from the page doing something completely random somewhere else, you'll have an idea and then you'll be back into the zone. So yeah, laying the foundations to help your brain just sort of process it in the background is a really great tip. So moving on to the next question, how do you ensure your story is felt throughout the video, and that it's, as we said, making those emotional connections that are super important if you want it to have the desired effect of being remembered and making people take action? So what are the kind of things you're putting in there to make sure it delivers on that?
Consistency and contrast are the main things that bring a video together to make it professional and not distract viewers by working out what they've got to do. They just need to be stuck in that story and listening to what's going on. We want our images, we want our themes, on-screen text to be constant and feel that part of the whole video, and not break that concentration. I've watched plenty where I can't work out what the style is, I can't work out what certain colours are supposed to mean, and it throws you off and you're not quite sure if red is suddenly now a good thing, or if this person is now a bad person, or it just turns into a mess. So we want to keep how it looks and how it feels consistent. That being said, we want to make things stand out. We want that contrast, but we want to control where that contrast is. If we want something to be bad, it needs to be different from the good stuff, whether that is using color, using spacing, using our voiceover, or if that only appears with a certain background on it, or down to sound effects, we can put different sound effects in and make the environment feel a bit different.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go on.
So at a basic level, it's just using those two things to tie it together and make it stand apart.
I was just going to say, yeah, I agree with that. I think my main thing would be to say keep it simple. So choose a style, obviously something which fits with your subject and also with your audience. There's lots of different things you do in VideoScribe, and when I'm teaching courses, I say this a lot because I'm teaching them how to do all these different things. And I'm saying, don't use all these in one video. Choose things which fit together, which work, and then stick to that style throughout the video. Because what you want is for it to be easy to watch. And like we were saying, you don't want people being distracted by, oh, what's that going there? Why is that happening there? They just want to get into the style of it, and then they can really focus on the actual content, and the rest just kind of fits with it naturally. So keep it simple and keep it consistent. Yeah.
I think I would agree that. Sorry.
Go on.
I was just going to say, yeah, I agree with relating it back to a core point. I think when you're thinking about your story in a narrative sense, think about what is the conclusion and the outcome for your story. What do you want to happen off the back of this story? And then as you're going along, think your points, do they relate to that outcome? When you read it back, does it seem like it communicates that outcome to you? Because if it doesn't, then maybe you need to think about rewording it or reworking it so that it does relate back to that. Because at the end of the day, your audience needs to remember that outcome. So everything you put into the story needs to relate to it somehow and sort of contribute to it.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're building your own little mini world, and then everything has to kind of make sense in that world, whether it is something super simple like you guys have been saying about color and language and kind of building the message towards what you're saying. It's like having, I don't know, Harry Potter, and in there in Hogwarts is like a modern classroom with like flat screen TVs. Like it just doesn't work, and then you're thinking, wait, where am I? Like it just throws you off. So I think, yeah, those are all great pieces of advice that I think are really easy to apply to basically anyone's video, regardless of how simple it is. It's just, like you said, picking a color palette, picking a style of imagery, and just running with that, and not getting a little bit swayed in different directions along the way. So we've started kind of talking about visualizing certain things, and I know, Oliver, you've said if there's something that you're not sure how to visualize, just write it down and come back to it later. But do you have any advice on visualizing intangible things, so like creativity or innovation? Because I feel like a lot of our videos end up talking about those topics, and sometimes it can be difficult to get that onto the screen effectively.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about trying to contextualize those ideas. So, for example, like you say, visualizing creativity. If you're trying to visualize just that word on its own, then you're going to get quite confused. Like, it doesn't feel very specific, but think about what kind of creativity is it. So if it's artistic creativity, maybe think about, paint brushes, pencils, or maybe it's technical creativity. So it's more sort of intellect, brains, gears moving together. It's about, if you're looking at your word or your phrase and you can't quite apply, you can't quite visualize anything to go along with it, try to sort of contextualize it, think about it in a wider sense and wider until you start to think of those sorts of images. And I'd also say, sometimes the best ideas aren't very obvious. So for example, there was a studio project where we were told to show the social side of a company by showing them fishing, but the same scene needed to communicate networking and that within that social community. So there's a little bit of first, like, how am I going to show a bunch of people fishing and sort of connecting networking wise? But I sort of showed the fish going between the different fishermen, so it's almost like emails going between different recipients, just to show that connection and that communication. And they really liked it. So, and it was not, it definitely wasn't the first idea I came up with. So definitely, reiterate, think about things under different contexts until you find something that you think, actually, that does communicate the same idea, even if it's not obvious. And also, as Louis said earlier, I'd emphasize the value of inspiration as well. So plenty of time for when I'm creating videos, I go into the concepts and metaphors image folder in VideoScribe, because there's plenty of images in there that communicate very vague concepts in a very concise way. So sometimes that can be of great help as well.
Yeah, it's almost like we've done some of the thinking for you on those ones if you want a quick little win with those. But yeah, sorry, Louis, I know you were going to jump in.
I was just going to say, I think it is amazing when you can do those creative ideas, that when that switch goes and you're just absolutely stoked on it. It's amazing. There's a lot of times with these quite vague ideas that we shouldn't really be scared of using these cliches and these tropes, because although I know it's used very often as like a light bulb, it's an idea, the big square hats means school, a spanner means anything to do with any type of engineering or fixing or anything like that. And they are quite overused, but people know what they mean. They relate to something. People, as soon as they see them worldwide, know exactly what that means. Even if we don't use floppy disks anymore to save our information, it has a meaning, and you should never be scared of using those design elements for what they're for, really.
Definitely. Although I feel like with Gen Z, we might have an actual expiry date on the floppy disk, because they will mean absolutely nothing. But for now,
I don't
definitely.
think I've ever used a floppy disk in my life, and I'm nearly 30.
It's not looking good for the floppy
It's
disk.
long been gone from daily life, but still has a very solid meaning.
Yeah, definitely. Any other points to add before we move on to the next question? No? So our penultimate question is, how detailed should your storyboard be? So are you getting absolutely everything out onto it, or is there kind of a point where you say this is ready to now start creating?
There's no one for that. It's just going to absolutely depend on what you're doing. If it's just for myself, where I know how it's going to look, I know what style I'm going to use, but I need to get my ideas out onto paper. I need to refine those ideas. It only needs to be good enough for me. It only needs to make sure that I know what's going on and I'm not forgetting 2 weeks later what scene I need to make. So for that, that's up to you. It's for you. If you're looking at doing client work or doing stuff with other people in the company, I would say very detailed, or as detailed as you can possibly get it. We deliver with all final illustrations for some storyboards, so they look exactly as it's going to look on your final video. Then you've got to think of, am I the only person who's going to be working on this? So like, do I have to send this out to an illustrator to work up these sketches into a nice graphics? Do I have to then send those graphics to an animator? Then do I need to send it to someone in Dubai who's going to translate it for me into a different language? I always go as detailed as is reasonable as I could possibly go. Just the amount of time it saved us doing this extra work, send it to a client, and then it's come back and they said, yes, this is all fine, compared to when we've assumed that they're going to know what we mean. So it made it less detailed, got it out quicker. It's come back and they've just said, well, we'd like it like this, which is what we've had in our head, which is what we expected it to be like, but we've never expressly said that. And then they've sent it to someone else in their organization who hasn't been as closely working with us, so doesn't get where we come from, hasn't heard all the backstory. So as detailed as you can bear to be, really. And I think the script is very important to have in there. The visuals, of course, are very important to have in there, but just as important is going to be your direction. So we, much in the same way as the first stage where we have like an ideas board telling what we want, we're going to have this direction in another column saying this man walks in, he stops, the camera pans off to the right, the car drives in, all of this sort of stuff is going on at the time. Then we've got sound effects in there, we've got whether the music's changing, and it's not good enough to just have the script and the accompanying visuals. We need actual direction of what is actually going to happen.
I think that's the most important. Yeah, like I think it's really important to emphasize that like you shouldn't take your thought processes for granted. I think it's very easy to write something or draw something, and in your head, you know, you're very confident in what you're doing and you know exactly how it works, you know the ins and outs, you know how you got to that idea and what it means. But when you show that to someone else, it's a piece of paper with some writing on it, or you know, a drawing on it. So it's very important to put as much, when you're working with other people, definitely put as much information as you can into it so that they understand where you're coming from and how you visualize this and how you've come up with it.
Yeah, or even working with yourself. We've had projects that last 4 days, we've had projects that last near on a year, and actually I forget things constantly. I've drawn stuff and then I come back 2 weeks later and I go, what on earth is that? And just having all this extra bits there, it's just going to make your life so much easier when you go on holiday for 2 weeks, come back and have to work on what on earth you were thinking.
The only thing I'd add to that is that's quite a lot of detail, and I think that for some people that's not going to work so well. So I don't want people to get put off like, oh my god, especially if you're working for a client or there's stakeholders and you want to make sure everyone understands it, and you know, before you actually spend time creating the video, everyone knows what it's going to look like and it's agreed and it's got the right kind of brand and it's got the right, you know, emphasis and everything. That's really important. But I think the main thing is it's got to be right for you. So it depends on why you're creating the video, what it's for, who needs to be involved. It is a great way of sharing the content at an early stage, which is really good, and to get feedback. So even if it's just you, you might still want to get feedback from other people on it. But yeah, you could do a very simple storyboard. It's whatever works with your process, the best way you work. So yeah, take all these ideas and then work out what's appropriate in your case.
Definitely, and I think it's worth noting here that we do have a storyboarding template. So if you haven't seen that before, we can also share this off the back of this session, because as Johnny said, it allows you to be as detailed or as sort of not vague, but as stripped back as you want to be. So if you literally just want to put in a couple of pictures to help you start thinking about the flow of your story, or if you want, as Louis said, to get into the detail of the directions and exactly what's going on screen, then it can flex to either of those ends. So we will share that afterwards as well. So that leads us on to our final question, which I seem to have lost my slide for, so we will just stay on this. Sorry about that. But the final question is just, if you were each to give one piece of advice for creating a successful storyboard, what would it be? Or like number one piece of advice that someone should take from this webinar? We'll start with Johnny.
Okay, so carrying on from what I was saying just now, personally, the way I work is that I tend to leave quite a lot of the detail to when I'm actually creating the scribe in Video Scribe. I find that that's when I get a lot of my ideas, when I'm actually playing about with the elements on the canvas and listening to the audio and seeing how they fit together. So I don't do maybe as much detail as these guys do. So for me, the storyboard is all about getting the layout and the structure right. So I know exactly where everything's going to go, where it's going to be placed, where things are relative to each other, and also then how the camera's going to move about that. So that's what I need to nail first before I go into VideoScribe. Because then once you've done that, it's relatively easy to then transfer that into VideoScribe. So you know where things are, you can place them, or you can build your basic scribe fairly easily and move things about so they're all in the right place. And then you can go through, what I do is I go through sort of element by element and work on the detail and the timings and the animations and things like that. So yeah, I tend to leave a bit more towards the end just because I know that works for me. But having said that, it's really important to have that structure defined, because what you don't want to do is start building it in VideoScribe, get halfway through and then go, oh, actually, no, that should be over there. And this, and it's just, it can be very difficult to rearrange things. So even if you haven't got the detail, at least you know how things are sort of laid out on the canvas, basically. Yeah.
Definitely. So you're all about setting that structure from the start, and then the rest can kind of flow afterwards. Nice. So Ollie, going to you, what would your number one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar in that I would say don't restrain yourself whilst you're coming up with these ideas. I find that, you know, especially when I'm doing my text storyboard, I may come up with ideas that seem wild and that I may not be able to execute with my skill set. It's sort of like, well, you know, I draw, you know, this flies in and it does this, that, and the other. And, you know, in the text storyboard, that sounds great and it sounds like the best video ever. But then, you know, when I'm writing it, I might be thinking, oh, how do I actually make this happen? And the important thing is, don't worry about that too much until it actually comes to animation, because solutions do present themselves. And once you start piecing it together visually, you know, in VideoScribe, you start to see things next to each other. It all starts to sort of come into place. It all starts to make sense. And it's better to have more ideas than fewer ideas. So definitely don't feel the need to question every decision that you're making, every idea that you come up with. Just write it all down and worry about how you're going to execute it when you actually execute it.
Great tip. Yeah, so don't limit yourself creatively, let whatever ideas you want in, and then, yeah, like you said, sort of work through them later. Nice. So Louis,
Yeah.
the final tip, what is your advice?
Mine's just based around not being attached to your ideas just because you've had one doesn't mean that's the best. You should always be prepared to change it and adapt it. You can come up with multiple ideas for scenes, for frames, for transitions, and then pick and mix them, choose them, try different combinations of this scene A with this scene B, see which one is going to work together. You may find ways that actually there's a transition that presents itself that you didn't realize that's going to be a bit more interesting. This stage, when we've just got them drawn out, is such an easy time to move things around. This is the best time to explore it, and it's a bit of a shame to stick with the first idea. It may be the best one. You don't always have to go with the second idea or third. You can go with the first one, but always give yourself a bit of an opportunity to change things. Just because it's done doesn't mean it's finished. And that goes with the script as well. If you're working on a scene and you're finding that actually this text doesn't work quite as well with these visuals, perhaps we've got this visual that is more closely related to illustrations that we have on hand. So there's a way that we can change that script to make it fit better. So it's not too late to do that at all.
No.
And then I think one last thing as well is don't do, if you're stuck on a section, leave it, keep going. Like you can't just sit there and just get absolutely bogged down in it. If you keep moving on, you keeping that brain creative muscle flexing, when you come back to it, you'll be nicely warmed up, or while you're doing sections that are later on, it's probably just going to come to you. Is what generally happens to me when I'm doing something totally different. 3 minutes on in the video, that's when the ideas come.
Definitely. Perfect. Well, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts and those tips as well. I think they're really useful things that anyone can apply to their video, regardless of how sort of simple or complex they are. They're all great pieces of advice, and hopefully they're really beneficial for everyone who has joined us today. So we do have about 9 minutes for Q&A now, so I can see we've had some questions coming in. So if you have also thought of any since we've just finished, then do get them in the question box and we'll run through them now. So I'll just get into them now. We've had a question from Bess who's asked, is a 5-minute video too long? If anyone wants to take that one.
Too long for what, really?
That's the thing.
Yeah, it depends what you're trying to do.
So Beth has added some,
okay.
Sorry, we've got some more detail. So the script is an article that contains 5 factors of a concept. Should I break the 5-minute video into 5 short videos, I guess, or include all 5 in one 5-minute video? What do you think is gonna work best?
I guess it depends how you want your audience to consume that information. If you want them to sit there and watch one video with 5 things in, yeah, really. I think it's a very easy trap to get hung up on is time, because we've all seen studies. If you've done the smallest bit of research, it says this is the optimum for a video. It's 4 minutes, 30 seconds. It's 2 minutes, 30 seconds. It's something like that. But I can't imagine how many videos I've watched that are exactly 4 minutes, 30 seconds compared to the 15-minute articles that I've read, watched, or videos on how to do stuff, or whatever we want to explain. There's videos on YouTube that are 5-second short stories. So don't focus too much on the time. Focus on how much you want to say and how much you might be perhaps confusing that message. 5 minutes is a good amount of time to say 5 minutes worth of content.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, we actually get this question quite a lot, so it's obviously something on people's minds, and it's really tricky one to answer because it really depends on so many things. It might well be that 5 minutes is way too long for some environments, some audiences, but not necessarily in all cases. So yeah, I just guess imagine the viewers watching it and just think how long it will seem to them. I've had the opposite problem where I've had to watch several things, and it's just so annoying. I want to watch the whole thing, and I'm having to go out this one, go in there, and each one says, "Oh, hi, this is," I've heard that 3 times already. So it really depends on how your audience are going to listen to it, watch it, and what you're trying to convey. So 5 minutes is not too long necessarily.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the emotion, facts, action as well. If you want your viewer to have to watch another video afterwards, that's the action they're going to have to do. If you want them to watch your content, get immersed in it and enjoy it, then that's not really an action you want, is to have to make them click and go somewhere else.
Definitely, yeah. I think hopefully that answers.
Sorry, no.
No, go on, are you going to add any?
I was just going to say, we get a lot of clients who come to us and say we want a 90-second video, and our first question is often, why is it a 90-second video? And that answer has never once been because we have a 90-second slot, because it's to fill this gap. It's because of this. It's always, we've been told that this is a good amount of time. And sure, that's going to be the perfect amount of time for a lot of videos. But if you can keep your audience's attention for 5 minutes, you should do that rather than trying to smash 5 minutes worth of content, which is normally quite interesting if you've got something to say, into 1 minute, because you're going to drive people mad. They're going to have no idea what you're talking about.
I think also if you are planning to split it into multiple parts, maybe consider, think about how you would split that into those multiple parts, and then look at one of those parts on its own and think, is this too much information or too little information for the audience to fit in? Try to think about it from an audience perspective. If someone who is completely new to your information read through this part, do you think they would be overwhelmed by that and they might want to, take a break before they take in any more information? Or is it not that much information on its own, and watching that on its own may just sort of drift out of their memory after a while? So I guess it's kind of determining how much content for whatever however you're thinking of splitting it up, if you are considering splitting it up.
Perfect. I think there is plenty to be getting on with there to help you kind of hopefully make the decision best. I hope that helped you kind of start thinking it through. So another question we've had is from Bill in Canada, who has asked, how do you tie background music into the planning and storyboard?
Generally, I don't tend to think of music that early in the process. I think maybe if you're thinking of a larger project, if it's like a longer video that you're planning to create, then the music, is more integral to the tone and kind of maybe the different, points that you're going through, the beginning, the middle, of the end, how that music might adapt to those different sections. I think generally, when a lot of the videos we sometimes create for like marketing purposes, when it's only a couple of minutes long, usually it will be a case that the video will be created and then I'll sort of be watching it and, what tone does this take, and where is this story taking place, and what characters does it involve, will sort of inform what kind of tone the music I go for will actually be. Is it very light-hearted and very playful? Is it a bit more serious, or is it comical? I think it's not it's not a one size fits all kind of solution.
Yeah, I think editing to the beat is very important if you're making an advert for a new car, or a music video, or breakdancing video, or a mountain biking or surfing edit, something like that. But for at least the stuff that we do in the studio, it has much less important than actually what you're saying. Of course, we can think about it early on. There's no reason not to think about that time, but for us, we've always found that the video influences the music rather than the music is going to influence how we go about creating a video. If we want a fast video, we already know that before we found a faster track.
Definitely. Okay, I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So one is from Volker, who's asking, how do you integrate call to action elements in the videos? So is there anything you do to kind of really highlight the next steps?
I think a lot of the standard way to do it is on the ending cards, so when you've got your logos and your websites and all that sort of stuff. But there is a lot of ways to sprinkle it throughout. The emotion, facts, and action don't have to be in such a solid order, so you can move them around. A lot of the time it is done in the voiceover, and a lot of time the action is presented as the solution. So if you wanted to buy a house, the solution to that is the action that you're going to do, which is contact your estate agency, your real estate. So I'd think about working that in at the very beginning and making sure that actually what you want them to do is being pushed by everything that you make in this video.
Perfect. I'm conscious of time, so unfortunately that is the last question we will answer now, but I know we've had a load more come through, so we will answer those offline and pick them up afterwards. And I'll involve Johnny, Oliver and Louis in that, so you're getting the full answers. But thank you so much for joining us today for this panel discussion. We hope you found it useful, and we certainly enjoyed having a bit of a chat about everything to do with storyboards and storytelling. And if you have any extra questions for us, you can email marketing@sparkle.com. That'll be manned by myself and my colleagues. So if you think of anything afterwards, you can send us an email and we'll make sure we get back to you. But yeah, thank you again for joining us, and thank you to Johnny, Oliver and Louis for sharing your thoughts. We hope we'll see you on another webinar soon. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.